The scene is sharp in my memory, like something out of a legal thriller. I'm standing inside my grandfather's cabin, coffee in one hand, shaking hands with none other than Michigan State Attorney General. We're in the middle of an intense conversation about how my HOA president has been pulling off a deliberate scam, systematically bleeding elderly homeowners dry for over 2 years, when suddenly, without warning, the entire front door of my cabin blasts open like a battering ram just hit it. No knock, no warrant, no permissions, just raw arrogance crashing through the threshold. And who storms in? Not the police, not a sheriff, not even some code enforcement officer with a clipboard. No, it's the devil herself. Brenda Wickshire, her face twisted with fury, clipboard clutched in her hand like it was a sword, eyes darting for something to sink her teeth into. Before she even bothers to look around the room, she launches into a shrieking tirade, hollering about compliance violations like she's running a boot camp for the damned. For 6 long months, this woman had been trying to strip me of my inheritance, my grandfather's cabin, using nothing but fraudulent fines, fake liens, and intimidation tactics. And now, in a single reckless moment, she had crossed a line she couldn't erase, breaking and entering a felony. But here's the part that makes me smile even now. She froze mid-scream, literally mid-word. Her rant cut off like someone hit pause, because she suddenly noticed who was sitting in my living room. Michigan's top prosecutor, the state attorney general himself, the man whose very presence makes corrupt politicians and criminal CEOs squirm in their chairs. The AG didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice. He just looked at her with cool authority and said, "Ma'am, you just committed multiple felonies in front of Michigan's chief law enforcement officer. Please step outside while we discuss your criminal charges." Brenda's face went ghost white, all the blood draining like someone pulled the plug. For once in her life, she was speechless. Justice, sharp and cold as winter steel, was about to be served. Now let me ask you something. What would you do if your HOA tyrant walked straight into the biggest mistake of her life? Where are you watching from right now? And have you survived your own HOA nightmare? Let me rewind and tell you how this nightmare began. My name's Rex Holloway, and 3 years ago, I inherited something priceless. Not money, not stocks, not land you flip for quick profit. No, I inherited my grandfather's lake cabin, a modest but irreplaceable piece of soul, sitting on 2.3 acres of woodland in Lakeshore Pines, Michigan, built back in 1960 with his own calloused hands after returning from Korea. The place carries the weight of history in every nail and beam. The cabin isn't just wood and stone, it's memory carved into structure. Hand-hewn cedar beams rise. Like the ribs of some great ship, a massive fieldstone fireplace, capable of heating half the county, dominates the main room. Out back, a private dock stretches over the water where 3 generations of Holloways learned to fish, to laugh, and to live. Mornings there feel like postcards from heaven. Mist drifts off the lake, rolling low and ghost-like, catching the first light of the sun. I brew coffee in my grandfather's battered aluminum percolator, the same one he used for decades. That distinctive bubbling sound, combined with the distant call of loons echoing across the lake, makes the cabin feel alive. Even the floorboards creak with memory, whispering stories of 60 years worth of Christmas mornings, summer barbecues, and family arguments that always ended in laughter. When I run my hand along the cedar siding, its rough texture still clings to the smell of sawdust and faint traces of Grandpa's Old Spice aftershave. When my marriage ended, broken and raw, I came here searching for peace. What I found instead was Brenda Wickshire, the human embodiment of a paper cut that refuses to heal and eventually turns septic. Picture a 58-year-old failed insurance adjuster who discovered late in life that bullying neighbors was far more profitable than being good at her actual job. She dresses in pressed khakis, sharp enough to slice bread, orthopedic shoes that squeak authority, and a measuring tape clipped to her belt like she's some kind of compliance commando. She cruises around in a spotless white Toyota Highlander, plastered with an HOA official bumper sticker, practicing intimidating stares in the rearview mirror. Like an actress preparing for a role nobody asked her to play, she slithered into Lakeshore Pines 5 years ago and seized control of the HOA presidency within 18 months, ran on a platform of protecting property values. Sounds noble, right? But her reign quickly turned into a catalog of cruelty that would have embarrassed dictators. She forced 84-year-old Mrs. Patterson to rip down bird feeders because they attracted vermin. She sued a Vietnam vet, Tom Bradley, because his American flagpole was 3 inches taller than her guidelines. She even ordered a cancer survivor to take down her memorial wind chimes because they produced noise pollution. That was Brenda's style. Cruelty disguised as compliance. Harassment wrapped in official paperwork. But me, I had something. She truly craved prime lakefront property. Property that predated her little HOA dictatorship by decades. My grandfather's legacy. My family's heart. And she wasn't going to stop until she took it from me. One gray Tuesday morning, she appeared at my door, her presence as welcome as mold in a basement. In her hand was what she called a courtesy notice. Courtesy. There was nothing courteous about the stack of papers she shoved at me. Inside, she had listed 47 violations against my cabin. Yes, 47. Everything from my dock extending 3 feet too far over the waterline, to my shed being misaligned with setback requirements, to my fire pit being labeled, "Get this on unpermitted recreational combustion structure." She slapped me with $500 in review fees plus $75 per day until I corrected the problems. When I pointed out that the cabin existed decades before the HOA was even dreamed up, she hit me with a smile so cold it could sour milk and said, "Previous ownership is legally irrelevant. Mr. Holloway, all properties must comply with current regulations regardless of antiquated construction dates. 30 days, or we file a lien against the land my grandfather built with his own blood and sweat, against the only piece of family legacy we had left." That night, I drove straight to the county courthouse, rage boiling in my chest. I dug through dusty boxes of HOA formation documents, flipping through page after page until my hands were shaken, and then I found it. The HOA had been incorporated exactly 3 months after my grandfather's funeral, and the worst part, the so-called consent forms had my grandfather's signature, a signature he couldn't possibly have given because he was already buried. That it wasn't sloppy paperwork, it wasn't oversight, it was outright fraud. Forgery, designed to rob a dead veteran's family of their land. But knowing and proving are two different beasts. I needed evidence, strategy, patience, and above all, I had to be smarter than Brenda Wickshire had ever been in her sad, power-hungry existence. This wasn't about HOA fees anymore. It was about honor, legacy, about making sure my grandfather's sacrifices years in Korea, his sweat building this place wasn't erased by a woman with a clipboard and a grudge. Brenda had picked the wrong family to rob. She had declared war. I just didn't know yet how far her crimes went, that she wasn't just targeting me, but had been bleeding the entire neighborhood dry, and that soon enough, she'd be staring down federal charges in real handcuffs. And so, I started documenting everything. Every interaction, every statement, every photograph she took. Brenda thought she was building a case against me, but she was actually constructing her own legal coffin, one violation at a time. The measuring tape wars had taught me something crucial. Brenda was playing checkers. While I was setting up Fortress, she wanted attrition, thinking I'd eventually crack under financial pressure and legal harassment. She hadn't an idea that every escalation was creating evidence for the federal case slowly taking shape in my mind. Jimmy Kowalski was just the first domino. Soon I'd have an entire parade of witnesses ready to testify about her systematic abuse of power. 2 weeks later, a process server knocked on my door at 7 a.m. sharp, interrupting the peaceful bubbling of my grandfather's coffee percolator. Nothing says good morning like being handed a lawsuit thick enough to use as kindling. Brenda's legal masterpiece read like bad fiction. 847 separate HOA violations dating back 3 years. Apparently, I'd been a criminal mastermind without knowing it. She wanted $12,000 immediately, plus attorney fees that would probably buy her a new Toyota. The cherry on top, an emergency injunction to prevent me from using my own dock during the litigation period. My family dock, the one where my grandfather taught me to tie fishing knots and my daughter caught her first bass. But Brenda's real genius was her whisper campaign. At Murphy's Diner, she'd lean across tables like she was sharing state secrets. That Rex Holloway is a dangerous, unstable veteran, Euthreaton's innocent neighbors. The scent of bacon and gossip, mixed in the morning air as she poisoned every conversation. Sally Mackenzie from the flower shop literally crossed Main Street when she saw me coming, clutching her purse like I might assault her with my coffee mug. I hired Stella Crawford, a property attorney from Grand Rapids with silver hair, steel eyes, and the kind of smile that meant someone was about to get legally dismantled. Over coffee at her office, she dropped some knowledge that changed everything. Rex, something interesting about Michigan law, Stella said, shuffling through paperwork. We have private attorney general statutes. When citizens uncover systematic fraud affecting the public, they can actually sue on behalf of everyone harmed. She explained that HOA formation isn't just paperwork. It requires genuine consent from existing property owners. My cabin, their little kingdom, and properties with established rights can't be retroactively subjected to restrictions. It's like trying to charge someone rent for land they already own. We filed a devastating fraudulent HOA formation, elder abuse for forging my grandfather's signature, and systematic harassment. Stella requested an emergency hearing to kill Brenda's injunction, arguing she had no legal authority over my pre-existing property rights. The breakthrough came at the next HOA board meeting. I walked into the community center conference room, stale coffee smell, mixing with nervous perspiration from 5 board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, and took a seat in the back, phone recording legally in my pocket. Brenda, mid-rant about the Rex situation, when Dale Pritchard, apparently forgetting basic intelligence, blurted out, "Look, we all know the HOA formation was rushed through before anyone could object. My cousin at Thekken's office said the paperwork was sketchy from day one. Maybe we should just bail. Brenda's voice cracked like Kia whip, but the damage was done. Every person in that room had just heard a board member admit they knew their was legally questionable. The silence that followed was so thick you could cut it with Brenda's mesh, her nephew, serving as board attorney. Despite having about as much property law experience as my fishing tackle box, immediately called recess and spent 10 minutes whispering frantically with his aunt. His face wasp-paled as old milk, and sweat stains were blooming under his cheap suit jacket. After the meeting, 3 neighbors approached me in the parking lot under the yellow streetlights. Voices hushed like we were planning a revolution. Martha Kessler, the elderly widow whose memorial garden Brenda had destroyed. She made me dig up my husband's roses. 40 years of marriage, and she called them unauthorized landscaping. Tom Bradley, the veteran, Rex. I survived 2 tours in Afghanistan. Beauty, never been as afraid of anyone as I am of that woman. Young couple with twin toddlers. Chef and us. $300 because our kids' chalk drawings were defacing common walkways. Each story revealed the same pattern. Brenda systematically targeted vulnerable residents who couldn't afford legal fights. Elderly widows, veterans on fixed incomes, young families, stretched thin. She was a predator disguised as a bureaucrat. Stella's research revealed that my grandfather's original deed included specific riparian rights, permanent water access that no later HOA could touch, no matter what rules they invented. Those rights were literally carved in legal stone, protected by decades of property law precedent, but instead of backing down when faced with legal reality, Brenda escalated. Her brother-in-law at First National Bank started making inquiries about my mortgage, fishing for pressure points. She began daily compliance inspections, showing up at dawn and dusk with her clipboard, photographing my garbage cans and measuring my grass like she was conducting forensic analysis. The harassment was becoming personal, vindictive, almost obsessive, but every escalation was creating more evidence of systematic abuse of power. My security cameras captured everything, and my phone recorded every conversation. Brenda thought she was tightening the noose. She was actually weaving her own legal straitjacket. 3 weeks after our legal gambit, Brenda dropped the nuclear option. A certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, the smell of fresh lake air turning sour as I read the contents. She'd filed a lien against my property for $18,500, including accumulated legal fees and something called community impact damages. But that wasn't her masterstroke. Her brother-in-law at First National Bank started calling my mortgage company, suggesting my property was under legal cloud and might require risk assessment review. Nothing like family connections turned banking into extortion. The daily harassment reached psychotic levels. Brenda started showing up at random hours, 6 a.m., lunchtime, even 9 p.m., with her trusty clipboard, snapping photos of everything from my garbage cans to visiting delivery trucks. She'd crouch behind bushes, measuring the distance between my dock posts, then pop up like a demented jack-in-the-box to announce new violations. One morning, the crunch of gravel under her orthopedic shoes woke me before dawn. Through my bedroom window, I watched her photograph my guest's pickup truck, then measure the distance from bumper to property line with a tape measure. That probably cost more than most people's monthly groceries. Unauthorized overnight parking in violation of subsection 12.4, she announced to nobody in particular, talking to her phone's voice recorder like she was documenting evidence at a crime scene. The woman was losing her grip on reality, but her campaign was brutally effective. My daughter called from college, worried because her mother had received concerning information about my legal troubles. My ex-wife, bless her suspicious heart, wanted to know if our daughter's college fund was at risk. "Dad, are you really going to La's grandpa's cabin?" my daughter asked, her voice small and scared over the phone. That question hit harder than any lawsuit. This wasn't just about property rights anymore. It was about preserving something for the next generation. But while Brenda was playing harassment games, I was playing detective. My attorney, Stella, had taught me to follow the money, and Brenda's money trail leads straight into fraud territory. The HOA's books showed $67,000 missing from the reserve fund over 2 years. Digging deeper through public records, I had discovered payments flowing from the HOA account to something called Wickshire Property Management, LLC, Brenda's Bernal company that had never managed any properties except extracting money from her neighbors. The missing funds had bankrolled her son's failed restaurant venture, and according to credit reports I could legally access, covered some serious gambling debts she'd racked up at the casino 90 miles north. Then my security cameras caught something beautiful. At 11 p.m. on a Thursday, footage showed Brenda sneaking around my property with a bag from Murphy's Diner. She crept toward my septic system area, dumped something near the drain field, then scurried back to her Highlander like a guilty raccoon. The next morning, she arrived at 8 a.m. sharp with an anonymous complaint about environmental violations and potential groundwater contamination. The irony was delicious. She was reporting her own sabotage. But the video evidence was even better. My cameras had captured her wearing distinctive pink gardening gloves during both the planting and the reporting. The same gloves she wore to every HOA board meeting, probably thinking they made her look official instead of ridiculous. When the county environmental inspector arrived, I had to work hard to keep a straight face. The contamination turned out to be rotting fish that still smelled like Murphy's famous Friday fish fry, complete with seasoning and lemon wedges. "Ma'am," the inspector told Brenda, "this appears to be disposed restaurant food, not environmental contamination. Do you have any idea how it got here?" Brenda's face went through more color changes than a mood ring, settling on a sickly green that matched her guilty conscience. That evening, I got an unexpected visitor. Jimmy Kowalski's brother, Danny, the private investigator Brenda had hired to dig up dirt on me, knocked on my door, looking sheepish. "Mr. Holloway, I need to come clean about something," Danny said, the porch light casting long shadows across his weathered face. "She owes me $1,200 and asked me to plant evidence in your garbage to make you look bad. I recorded the whole conversation." Danny handed me a small digital recorder. Brenda's voice came through crystal clear. "Find anything that makes him look dangerous, unstable, or illegal. If you can't find it, I'll pay you a bonus if it sticks." The Kowalski brothers, both Jimmy the Surveyor and Danny the Pie, were now willing to testify about Brenda's systematic fraud and evidence tampering. Her web of corruption was unraveling faster than cheap fishing line, but she was getting desperate, and desperate people make dangerous mistakes. The financial pressure wasn't working. The harassment was creating evidence against her, and now her hired guns were switching sides. Brenda was about to discover what happens when you corner a veteran who's finally had enough. That weekend, while Brenda was probably plotting her next harassment campaign, I decided to explore my grandfather's legacy more thoroughly. In his old military trunk, the same olive drab footlocker he'd carried through Korea, I found documents that would change everything. Buried beneath his Bronze Star citation and faded photographs was the original 1960 property deed. Still crisp, despite 60 years in storage. As I unfolded the yellowed legal paper, the misty smell of old documents mixing with my grandfather's lingering Old Spice cologne, my hands started shaking. That deed didn't just establish property boundaries, it included something called riparian rights, granting permanent water access and mineral extraction privileges. But the real bombshell was in the surveyor's notes. My property extended 40 feet further west than anyone had realized, including a significant chunk of what everyone thought Wascoman HOA land. Brenda's prized rose garden, the one she'd spent $15,000 off community improvement funds landscaping, was sitting squarely on my land. Her precious gazebo, where she held court during neighborhood gatherings, also mine. The woman had been trespassing on my property for 3 years while trying to steal it from me. But that wasn't the most shocking discovery. Cross-referencing, the deed with Corrin County maps revealed that the entire HOA formation was built on fraudulent property boundaries. They'd never had legal authority over my land because they'd never actually owned the property they claimed to be managing. The insurance angle became clear when I researched why Brenda's license had been suspended. Court records showed she'd filed false hail damage claims on properties she didn't own, using fake before and after photos to collect insurance payouts. The same pattern I was seeing now, targeting properties with elderly or deceased owners who couldn't fight back. Her HOA presidency wasn't about community improvement. It was a sophisticated property fraud. She'd identify vulnerable properties, manufacture violations, then force sales through liens and legal pressure. The proceeds would fund her gambling habits and failed business ventures while she posed as a concerned neighbor, protecting property values. My grandfather's trunk contained one more treasure: letters he'd written but never sent, expressing suspicion about the HOA formation process. His shaky handwritten griveled he'd suspected something fishy about the consent forms but died before he could investigate further. Rex, one letter began, "If you're reading this, then the vultures have probably circled. Don't let them steal what we built. Fight for this land like I fought for this country." His military training had taught him to spot deception, and he'd Brenda's fraud from the beginning. Now I had the legal ammunition to finish what he'd started. The riparian rights were ironclad, protected by decades of property law precedent that no HOA by water access rights from 1960 trumped any residential association formed in the 1980s. Brenda's entire power structure was built on legal quicksand, but I didn't immediately reveal my discovery. Military logistics taught me that timing is everything in strategy. Instead, I quietly contacted the state attorney general suffice about the broader fraud pattern affecting multiple properties. If Brenda had done this to my family, how many elderly property owners had she victimized? How many veterans had been intimidated into paying fraudulent fines or selling their family land? My case wasn't just about one cabin anymore. It was about systematic elder abuse and HOA corruption that needed state-level investigation. The Attorney General's office confirmed they'd received similar complaints about fraudulent HOA formations across Michigan. They were building a case. for new legislation to protect property owners from predatory associations, and my documentation was exactly what they needed for their legislative testimony. The meeting was scheduled for the following month at my cabin, neutral ground away from the state capitol, where we could review evidence without political distractions. I spent the next week preparing a comprehensive presentation, financial fraud evidence, property boundary documents, victim testimonies, and recordings of Brenda's harassment campaigns. But I kept the biggest revelation secret. Brenda's rose garden was about to crumble when she discovered she'd been the trespasser all along. The next morning, I called an emergency meeting of what we'd started calling the coffee club. Neighbors who'd be in quietly gathering at my cabin to share Brenda horror stories. By 10 a.m., 12 people crowded around my grandfather's handmade dining table, the smell of fresh coffee mixing with righteous anger and nervous energy. Attorney Stella Crawford joined us via video call from her Grand Rapids office, her silver hair perfectly styled even on a Saturday morning. Folks, what we're looking at here goes way beyond property disputes. This is RICO territory, racketeer-influenced, and corrupt organizations act, originally designed for organized crime, but it applies perfectly to systematic HOA fraud. Martha Kessler, the elderly widow whose memorial garden had been destroyed, leaned forward with interest. You mean what she did to my Harold's roses was actual racketeering? Absolutely, Stella replied. Pattern of fraud, elder abuse through forging deceased signatures, and financial crimes affecting multiple victims. The federal government takes this very seriously. I spread my grandfather's property deed across the table like a battle map. Here's what changes everything. Grandpa's land extends 40 ft past where anyone thought. Brenda's entire rose garden kingdom sits on my property. Tom Bradley, the veteran, whose flagpole had been under attack, whistled low. So, she's been trespassing while trying to steal your land for 3 years. I confirmed, but here's the strategy. We don't reveal this until the state attorney general meeting. Let her keep digging her legal grave. Sal Torino from Murphy's Diner had been quietly documenting Brenda's defamatory statements during her lunch hour gossip sessions. I've got witnesses to her calling you dangerous and unstable. That's textbook defamation with multiple witnesses. The knowledge sharing became amateur class in fighting bureaucratic corruption. Stella explained that elder abuse statutes make forging a dead person's signature a federal crime, not just fraud. Systematic targeting of elderly homeowners triggers additional whistle protections that can result in significant financial rewards for victims who come forward. Most importantly, Michigan's private attorney general laws allow citizens to sue on behalf of the public when they uncover fraud affecting entire communities. My case could potentially recover stolen money for everyone Brenda had victimized over the years. Jimmy Kowalski contributed surveying expertise, explaining how to document actual property boundaries using county records instead of trusting maps. His brother Danny provided private investigation techniques for legally gathering evidence of harassment and financial crimes. The key is documentation, Danny explained, accepting a second cup of Martha's famous coffee. Every photo, every recording, every witness statement builds the case. Patterns of abuse are much harder to dismiss than isolated incidents. We organized our evidence like a military operation. Tom Bradley contributed his service organizations like Defense Fund and connections to other veterans who'd been targeted by predatory HOAs. Martha documented the systematic destruction of longtime residents' improvements through manufactured violations. The young couple with twins provided financial records showing how Brenda's arbitrary fines had forced them to choose between paying fake HOA penalties and buying. Their story would resonate with any jury or legislative committee. Local newspaper editor Frank Morrison, recently retired from the Detroit Free Press, offered to document our fight for potential statewide coverage. HOA corruption is a growing problem across Michigan. Your case could be the catalyst for real legislative reform. Even hardware store owner Pete Kowalski, no relation to the Surveyor brothers, just another polished name in our heavily ethnic neighborhood, started an unofficial Rex Defense Fund by placing a coffee can at his checkout counter. Within a week, neighbors had contributed over $400 in loose change in small bills. The planning got detailed and specific. We created Operation Clipboard, our code name for coordinating the Attorney General presentation. Tom Bradley insisted on military-style operational security, which mainly meant using secure messaging apps and referring to Brenda as Target Alpha in our text communications. Martha brought homemade cookies to every planning session, insisting that righteous anger worked better on a Mac. Her chocolate chip cookies became the unofficial fuel of our resistance movement. The timeline was ambitious but achievable. 30 days to gather final evidence, coordinate witness testimonies, and prepare comprehensive documentation for the state attorney general. Stella would present the legal framework while he provided the human story and evidence of systematic abuse. Our secret weapon was patience. While Brenda escalated her harassment campaigns, we were building an ironclad federal case that would Her entire fraud operation, every threatening letter she sent, every bogus fine she imposed, every lie she spread just added more evidence to our growing pile. The coffee club had evolved from a support group into a well-organized resistance movement. We had legal expertise, documentation, witnesses, financial backing, and most importantly, the moral clarity that comes from fighting genuine injustice. Brenda thought she was pressuring isolated victims into submission. She was actually uniting an entire community against systematic corruption. The trap was set. Now we just had to wait for her to walk into it. Brenda's desperation hit like a tornado. The following week, she hired Danny Kowalski, before he switched sides to follow me around town like some discount private eye from a bad movie. The irony was delicious. She was paying someone to gather dirt on me while I was building a federal case against her. But her real masterpiece was the false police report. Officer Mike Torres knocked on my door Tuesday evening. His cruiser's red and blue lights painting my cabin walls like a crime scene. The smell of pine needles and evening mist couldn't mask the tension crackling in the air. "Mr. Holloway, we received a complaint that you threatened someone with violence, specifically mentioning your military training," Torres said, looking about as convinced as a skeptical teenager. "Care to tell me your side?" I invited him in for coffee and laid out my complete documentation, security camera footage, recorded conversations, witness statements, the works. Torres spent 2 hours reviewing everything, his expression growing more disgusted with each piece of evidence. "Between you and Dam," he said finally, "Mrs. Wicker has credibility issues with our department. Her story has more holes than and the timeline doesn't match her previous complaints." Torres left me with unofficial advice. "Keep document. This woman's harassment pattern is escalating and desperate people make dangerous mistakes." The next morning brought Brenda's most brazen move yet. She arrived at the county building with a briefcase full of fake environmental reports, trying to bribe Inspector Carl Hendris into condemning my septic system. The woman actually offered him $500 to write up emergency violations that would force me off my property. Carl called me immediately. "Rex, you're not going to believe what just happened. That HOA lady tried to pay me to fabricate violations on your property. I've got the whole conversation recorded on my phone." But Brenda's psychological warfare extended beyond my property lines. She called my ex-wife with elaborate lies about my criminal behavior and mental instability, claiming I was becoming dangerous and shouldn't have visitation rights with our daughter. "Dad, Mom's worried about you," my daughter said during our weekly call, her voice small and confused. "She says, people are racing you threatened to hurt someone." That conversation nearly broke my heart. Explaining to your child that someone is spreading lies about you feels like trying to describe cancer. Ugly, unfair, and impossible to make sense of. Meanwhile, Brenda's whisper campaign reached nuclear levels. At the post office, grocery store, even the gas station, she'd corner anyone who'd listened with stories about the dangerous veteran who shouldn't be allowed around decent families. Young mothers started crossing the street when they saw me coming. The pharmacist asked if I was getting proper mental health. Even my barber, who'd cut my hair for 5 years, seemed nervous and wouldn't make eye contact. That psychological pressure was brutal, but every escalation was creating more evidence. My security cameras caught her teenager accomplice dumping motor oil near my dock at midnight. The same kid she'd paid $50 to create fake environmental violations. When the county inspector arrived to investigate her anonymous complaint, I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. The contamination was obviously planted, complete with receipts from the auto parts store still stuck to the oil containers. But the real breakthrough came when Danny Kowalski knocked on my door, looking like a man carrying a guilty conscience. The porch light cast long shadows across his weathered facias. He shifted nervously from foot to foot. "Mr. Holloway, I can't do this no more. She owes me $1,200 and asked me to plant evidence in your garbage to make you look dangerous. I recorded everything because I knew she'd try to stiff me on payment." Danny handed me a digital recorder counting Brenda's voice, giving explicit instructions. "Find anything that makes him look unstable, violent, or illegal. If you can't find evidence, create it. I'll pay a $1,000 bonus if it leads to his arrest." The woman had crossed from harassment into conspiracy and evidenced both serious felonies that would play beautifully in federal court. Her financial desperation was becoming copious too. The HOA bank account was down to $847 after 2 years of systematic reserve funds that should have covered snow removal, and landscaping had disappeared into her personal LLC, funding her son's failed restaurant and covering gambling debts at the Indian casino. Several homeowners received Dovered notices for services they'd already paid for through HOA fees. The community was starting to notice that their association wasn't providing the services they'd been paying for. Brenda needed my property sale to cover the missing money before the annual audit exposed her theft. She was trapped between federal prosecution and financial ruin, which made her more dangerous, but also more desperate. The coffee club watched her meltdown with mixture of satisfaction and concern. Cornered animals bite, and Brenda was running out of legal options. Brenda's final gambit arrived via Channel 7 news van pulling into my driveway on a Thursday morning. The crunch of Gravelander television truck tires mixed with the distant sound of loons calling across the lake. Nature's soundtrack to media manipulation. Reporter Jessica Chen knocked on my door with cameras rolling, her perfectly stilled hair catching the morning sunlight. "Mr. Holloway, we're investigating reports that you've been threatening elderly neighbors and using your military background to intimidate residents. Would you care to comment?" He invited them in for coffee, which seemed to surprise Jessica. Most people either slam doors in reporters' faces or launch into defensive rants. Instead, I calmly set out my complete documentation on the dining room table. Photos, recordings, legal documents, and witness statements organized like evidence at a crime scene. "This should be interesting," I said, pouring fresh coffee into my grandfather's old mugs. "Let me show you what's really been happening in our little community." Jessica's cameraman kept rolling as I walked them through Brenda's systematic fraud campaign. Theft signatures, the missing HOA funds, the harassment videos, even the security footage of her planting dead fish near my septic system. By the time I finished, Jessica was furiously taking notes while her cameraman muttered, "Holy shit," under his breath. "This isn't the story we came to cover," Jessica admitted. "Someone called our tip line claiming you were a dangerous veteran, terrorizing Jinnicket neighbors." That someone was obviously Brenda, who'd spent her morning crafting a narrative about Thornstable military man threatening peaceful retirees. She'd even provided carefully edited photos, making my cabin improvements look like compound fortifications and my security cameras appear sinister rather than protective. But Brenda's media strategy backfired spectacularly when the story aired. That evening, instead of painting me as the villain, Channel 7 ran a segment titled HOA Horror When Neighbors Attack, featuring my evidence and multiple neighbor testimonies. Martha Kessler appeared on camera holding photos of her husband's garden before Brenda destroyed it. 40 years of marriage, and she called his roses unauthorized landscaping. That woman has no soul. Tom Bradley stood beside his perfectly legal flagpole. "I fought for this country, and now I'm fighting for the right to honor it on my own property." The young couple with twins described choosing between fake HOA fines and buying groceries. "She'll find us $300 because our children drew hopscotch squares with sidewalk chalk." Within hours, Channel 7's phone lines were flooded with similar HOA horror stories from across Michigan. The station assigned a full investigative team to what they dubbed the HOA Files, a week-long series about predatory residential associations. Local social media exploded with support. Murphy's Diner became unofficial headquarters for the Free Rex movement, with Sal Torino posting daily debates on Facebook. The hardware store's coffee can collection grew to over $800 in community donations. But real victory came when Channel 7's legal correspondent contacted Attorney General Rebecca Santos for comment. The AG's office confirmed they were investigating systematic HOA fraud across Michigan and planned to use my Casillas, a flagship example, in upcoming legislative testimony. "Mr. Holloway's documentation represents exactly that kind of predatory behavior we're working to stop," Santos said on camera. "No homeowner should face harassment, fraud, or intimidation from their residential association." The media attention triggered something beautiful. Other Brenda victims started coming forward. A retired teacher from across town called to report that Brenda had targeted her late husband's property with fraudulent violations. A veteran from the next county shared recordings of Brenda offering to consult on his HOA problems for a hefty fee. Even the Kowalska brothers went public. Jimmy appeared on camera explaining how Brenda had paid him to find violations regardless of factual measurements. Danny provided audio recordings of her instructions to plant evidence and create false documentation. The state attorney general's office moved our meeting up by 2 weeks, citing urgent public interest in the case. They also assigned additional staff to investigate the broader pattern of HOA corruption we'd uncovered. Brenda treated image control, calling Channel 7 to demand equal time for her side of the story. But when Jessica Chen arrived at her house with cameras rolling, Brenda refused to answer questions about the missing HOA funds, the forged or the evidence tampering. Instead, she hid behind her front door, shouting slogans that made less sense the longer she screamed them. "Fake news" and "veteran privilege," echoing through the wood paneling in tones of desperation rather than authority. Her fortress of denial was collapsing, and everyone in the community could hear it. And the community transformation. It was nothing short of remarkable. Neighbors who had once been too afraid to whisper their frustrations were now standing shoulder to shoulder, swapping stories, pooling documentation, and demanding accountability. The quiet coffee club that used to meet in hushed tones had grown into a 20-family coalition. They weren't just drinking coffee anymore, they were organizing, archiving, and building a case that would end years of systematic abuse. What Brenda thought would be her private kingdom was becoming the center of a rebellion. The Attorney General's meeting had been circled on my calendar for weeks, every day inching closer like the drumbeat of a coming battle. By the time it Arrived, Brenda had no idea the avalanche about to fall on her. Tuesday afternoon arrived crisp and clear, with autumn sunlight flashing across the lake like gold coins scattered by invisible hands. The water mirrored the fiery maples and oaks that lined its edges, giving the whole place an air of calm before the storm. At exactly 2 p.m., a black SUV rolled down my gravel drive and came to a stop. Out stepped Michigan State Attorney General Rebecca Santos, professional, composed, and carrying herself like a woman who had stared down corruption more times than she could count. Behind her followed an aide with a leather binder and a plainclothes security officer whose every movement radiated quiet readiness. Santos shook my hand at the door, exchanging polite words about the beauty of the lakefront, but our pleasantries were cut short by a noise that shattered the stillness, the sharp, grating screech of tires tearing across gravel. Dust and leaves exploded into the air as Brenda's white Toyota Highlander fishtailed into my driveway, like she was answering a 5-alarm fire. Perfect timing, I muttered under my breath, already bracing myself. The driver's door flew open, and Brenda emerged like a storm cloud, clutching her clipboard as if it were both shield and weapon. Poor Dale Pritchard stumbled out behind her, dragged along like reluctant backup, his shoulders sagging with the kind of dread you only see in a man who knows he's on the losing side. Brenda came charging across my yard, orthopedic shoes pounding the earth with all the fury of misplaced righteousness. She didn't even glance at the official vehicles, didn't notice the government plates, didn't recognize the posture of the armed officer by Santos's side. She was blind to everything except her own obsession. Rex Holloway, she bellowed, waving her measuring tape like a sword. You are in violation of 17 new residential codes, and I am here for immediate compliance inspection. This illegal gathering violates occupancy restrictions and will be reported. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. I swear you could hear a loon calling from across the lake. Even the breeze seemed to pause, as if nature itself was waiting for what came next. Brenda's mouth was still open mid-tirade when her eyes finally locked on Attorney General Santos. Standing calmly beside me, state badge glinting on her jacket, Santos arched one perfect eyebrow. Her voice was low, calm, but carried enough authority to level mountains. Ma'am, you just committed breaking and entering, trespassing, and harassment in front of Michigan's chief law enforcement officer. I suggest you step back and identify yourself. The effect was instant. Brenda's face cycled through shades like a human mood ring, red with rage, white with shock, then a sickly green as realization dawned. Her sacred clipboard began trembling. In her grip, I added, "No, this is official HOA business." She stammered, stumbling over words as she backed up a step. "We have every right. Are you Brenda Wickshire?" Santos interrupted coolly, flipping open her notes. "President of this HOA, the one we've been investigating for systematic fraud, elder abuse, and racketeering." The word racketeering hit Brenda like a hammer. She staggered backward, actually clutching her chest as though the syllables themselves had weight. "This is all lies," she shrieked. "He's a dangerous veteran. He threatened me. I have documentation." "Interesting," Santos replied smoothly. "Because we have documentation too. Hours of security footage showing you planting evidence. Recordings of you instructing private investigators to fabricate violations, and financial records proving you've embezzled over $60,000 from your neighbors." I stepped forward then, presentation folder in hand, papers rustling in the autumn breeze. Months of careful investigation distilled into ink and paper. "And Brenda," I said, "there's something else you should know about that prize-winning rose garden of yours." Her eyes narrowed, suspicion and fear warring in her expression. "What about my garden?" "It's on my land. It has been for 3 years." I unfolded my grandfather's original deed, pointing to the surveyor's marks. "No, Brenda, it's on my land. You've been trespassing while trying to steal from me. The irony is delicious." She snatched the deed from my hand, scanning desperately. Her measuring tape slipped from her grip and hit the ground with a metallic clang, the sound of judgment being passed. "This can't be right," she whispered, but the hollow ring in her voice told everyone she knew it was. Santos's aide stepped forward with the official papers. "Ms. Wickshire, you are facing federal charges for elder fraud, systematic racketeering, evidence tampering, and civil rights violations. The FBI will be contacting you shortly." Behind her, Dale Pritchard panicked. "I was just following orders. I didn't know about the money or the forged documents. She told us it was legal." "Dale, shut up," Brenda hissed. But it was too late. His admission had already cemented his guilt in front of the state's top prosecutor. The security officer moved with practiced calm, escorting both of them back toward their vehicle. Through my window, I watched Brenda unravel, screaming about conspiracies, fake news, and veterans plotting against her Evan as her Highlander disappeared down the road. When Santos turned back to me, her lips curved in the faintest smile. "Mr. Holloway, your documentation is exactly what we need for next month's legislative hearings. This case will be the cornerstone of HOA reform in Michigan. And that was the turning point. Channel 7's news van arrived just in time to capture Brenda's humiliating retreat. Within days, the footage was everywhere, neighbors watching, strangers cheering, Brenda exposed. The war was over. She had walked into the biggest mistake of her life, and it was all on camera. 1 week later, at 6 a.m., FBI agents showed up at her house. Brenda and Dale were taken away in handcuffs. The photo made the front page. Brenda's sacred clipboard abandoned in her driveway like a fallen weapon. The headline read, "Veteran exposes multi-million-dollar HOA fraud ring." The dominoes fell fast. A federal judge dissolved the HOA. The state victim compensation fund covered our legal fees. Brenda was ordered to pay $89,000 in restitution. Pritchard's tire shop was liquidated to cover back taxes. The Kowalski brothers, once bullied into compliance, received whistleblower rewards and started their own honest business. But the real victory wasn't money, it was community. Martha Kessler's memorial garden was rebuilt with roses donated by the local nursery. Tom Bradley's flagpole became a neighborhood celebration, flags from every military branch flying high. Our coffee club transformed into the Lakeshore Community Association voluntary. No fees, just neighbors helping neighbors. We meet at my cabin, where Martha brings her cookies and Tom tells fishing stories that always grow taller by the month. Healing rippled outward. My ex-wife admitted she had doubted me, but now she saw the truth. My daughter came back to the cabin for the first time in years, proud of her father for standing up. She caught a base so big my grandfather would have sworn it was a family record. With part of the settlement, I established the Lakefront Veterans Retreat, giving combat veterans a place to breathe, recover, and heal. 40 veterans in our first year. Laughter on the dock. Stories by the fire. Peace where once there was only tension. Brenda's greed created something beautiful in spite of her. Where her rose garden once sat, we built a community compost bin, feeding Martha's flowers instead of her ego. Every evening now, I sit on that dock with coffee in hand, watching the sunset set fire to the lake. Loons call across the water, the same water my grandfather claimed for us. The weight of stress has lifted, replaced by something deeper: justice served, community restored. Brenda. She got 5 years in federal prison and a lifetime of restitution. Dale is picking up trash on the very streets he once patrolled with a tape measure. Standing up to bullies doesn't just protect you, it protects everyone who comes after you. Have you survived an HOA nightmare? Share your story below. Your experience might help someone else fight back. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, and join us, because we're building a community that refuses to be bullied by petty tyrants with clipboards. And next week, how a small-town mayor tried to shut down a veteran's food truck until he discovered that vet had direct access to the governor.